Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan N.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, the second part thereof for the day for the 4th of July 2025. Because it's Independence Day, I don't know, some country somewhere wanted to go in the opposite direction to the United Kingdom. I mean, who would want to do that? It's ridiculous. Because it's Independence Day somewhere in the world, I thought I'd better start with, indeed, the United States. And of course, we're going to be talking about the aid halt that has been, well, I was going to say enacted by Elbridge Colby, but actually it might be Pete Hegseth who ticked the box on behalf of Colby. So let's look into this. First of all, remind you that the US stopped a bunch of weapons going to Ukraine, mainly air defense systems. Elbridge Colby's argument is that the US resources must be preserved for possible fight against China, but strength in Europe is a force for deterrence in the Pacific, and commanders-in-chief don't get to choose the crises they confront. The US can't lock up its Patriot missiles for a different war that may or may not come, and doing so demonstrates weakness that invites more war, said the editorial board in the Wall Street Journal. So there's this reaction against, and Ben Hodges here saying this will kill innocent Ukrainian civilians. It reflects the administration's failure to appreciate how defeating Russia will deter China. China sees unreliability in Washington, D.C. Bad news for the Pacific allies. It appears Colby did this on his own. There has also been an analysis. Defense Department held up a shipment of US weapons for Ukraine over what officials said were concerns about its low stockpiles. There's been an analysis by senior military officers, and it's found that the aid package would not jeopardize American military's own ammunition supplies, according to NBC. And that's pretty obvious, since some of the weapons that were included in the package aren't even weapons that the US uses anymore. So it's just, it was clearly, I think, an anti-Ukraine thing. The Pentagon and State Department defend Ukraine arms pools as America first agenda, but of course that doesn't stack up. And as we heard, the European partners were reportedly caught off guard and were scrabbling to work out what to do about this. There's also been internal issues within the US administration, where I think the State Department didn't know what the DOD was doing, and so it's not just that Europe was caught off guard, but actually the American administration may have been caught off guard. Indeed, Trump probably didn't even know about this, and we'll get onto that in a second. So we then hear today that Richard Blumenthal, who is the senator behind the Lindsey Graham-Blumenthal bill for sanctioning Russia, says proud to lead 17 members of Congress demanding Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth reverse his dangerous decision to freeze munitions and arms shipments to Ukraine. This is precisely the wrong moment to curtail our aid. We must meet Putin's brutal assault with the arms Ukraine needs to defend itself. This cruel misstep contradicts President Trump's recent NATO commitment of support, a mixed message emboldening Putin to continue his bloody attacks and atrocities, and rejecting serious peace talks. We must stand with Ukraine. Absolutely 100% agreement from me there. So according to well-placed US military sources, the Pentagon has halted weapons supplies needed by Ukraine at the crucial moment in its fight with Russia. The weapons, which are already on their way to Ukraine and in Poland, include those missile interceptors, 155mm, artillery ammunition. So Russia fired over 500 missiles and drones at Ukraine on Sunday night. Well, so this was already a complaint going back to a previous massive strike. It was their biggest air assault since the war began. 2 days later, Trump halted delivery of PAC-3 air defense missiles to Ukraine, says Tommy Vietor from Pod Save America. Well, actually, then you had last night, where 539 drones were sent in and another 11 missiles, 550 munitions sent against predominantly Kyiv. So, yeah, the work of Defense Undersecretary Elbridge Colby, fascinating that 30 PAC-3 missiles for Ukraine is too much, $80 million, but expending billions on even rarer THAADs and SM-3 interceptors as well as PAC-3s defending Israel and from Iran and the Houthis is not. So they are giving some stuff that's the same as what they are stopping from going to Ukraine to Israel. but we can't leave. It's America first. We can't leave our own stockpiles bare. Well, why are you giving that stuff to Israel when they are not receiving at the moment nearly as much in terms of ballistics and drone munitions, in their airspace? Ukraine needs them more desperately. And as Branislav Stanchev here says, effing Elbridge Colby, man. I've had dealings with this cretin before he got appointed and always knew he would be really bad news for our foreign policy in general, but Ukraine in particular. He's a one-track mind fixated on China with astonishingly shallow understanding of strategy. So there's a lot of criticism here of Elbridge Colby. There he is on the right, Pete Hegseth behind. Big news, members of Donald Trump's inner circle, as well as several Republican congressmen, have openly accused Pete Hegseth's deputy Colby of deliberately sabotaging US military aid to Ukraine. According to Politico, Colby allegedly pushed his initiative on his own, bypassing both the White House administration and the State Department. That's what I said earlier, citing the depletion of US military stockpiles as justification. Congressman Michael McCall made a statement on the matter. He's a Republican. I believe that this is all the doing of Colby, the Pentagon's top foreign policy official. In reality, we don't have a functioning national security advisor right now. That's because Mike Waltz had to go because of all the scandals and whatnot, and Marco Rubio took on his role. So Marco Rubio's got like 4 different roles now, and it's very likely he didn't consult Rubio about this. So this looks to be a single decision from Colby. But then NBC exclusive, Hegseth halted weapons for Ukraine despite military analysis that the aid wouldn't jeopardize US readiness. So then there's this idea that Colby was probably behind it, but Pete Hegseth has signed this off despite the evidence pointing to the justification being wrong. Signed it off, and still we're probably at a position where Donald Trump didn't know about it. Because we even know that he didn't have a firm grasp on the big, beautiful bill. So that's his massive signature piece of policy, the thing that he should know the most about. And we know not only from kind of inside leaks and ideas, take this, for example, but Trump still doesn't have a firm grasp about what his signature legislative achievement does. According to 3 sources with direct knowledge of the comments, the president told Republicans at the meeting that there are 3 things Congress shouldn't touch if they want to win elections: Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. But we're touching Medicaid in the bill, said one member responded to Trump, according to the 3 sources. The White House didn't respond for a request for comment. So he didn't. So there's this idea he didn't even realize that the bill is going to town on particularly Medicaid. And but we can generate these conclusions from these leaks and stories, but we also know it from literal questions to Trump in public. So Trump's been asked about the bill and doesn't know the answers. He was asked about the specific numbers the other day. He said, I don't know. I think it's a little more than that, or something like. It was really vague, he doesn't know the bill. He doesn't know the bill. So when it comes to get it back to Ukraine, when it comes to decisions about weaponry and whether it's going to go to Ukraine or not, Trump won't be in on that. Like if he doesn't know what's going on with his main signature bill, he's not going to be aware of what's going on under the bonnet with regard to the machinations of aid to Ukraine, etc., etc. Now, that's not me excusing Trump. He just doesn't have his finger on the pulse because he's spending too much time playing golf and twatting about on Truth Social. So, yeah. And at the same time, his envoy, his golf buddy, his real estate mogul mate, Steve Witkoff, who for some reason is the envoy to Russia. Okay, he's got Soviet grandparents. So, conflict of interest. Anyway, Steve Witkoff is now pushing to lift energy sanctions on Russia, according to Politico. While Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is reportedly advocating for the easing of energy sanctions, others in the administration apparently disagree, as well they bleeding should. So let's go into the Kyiv Independent version or reporting on what was in Politico. I do that because I could go to the Politico article, but I just like to support Ukrainian journalism here. So that's the situation. Witkoff is reportedly advocating for the easing of energy sanctions. Others in the administration disagree. Interior Secretary Doug Burgum favours reducing US reliance on Russian imports rather than expanding trade, according to Politico. Yep, good. Despite pledging during his campaign to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours, Trump has made little progress on securing a ceasefire. Nearly 7 months of his presidency and several peace talks between Russia, Ukraine and the US, no ceasefire agreement has been reached. Moscow continues intensifying its attacks against Ukrainian cities. Russia launched one of the largest aerial attacks in Ukraine on July the 4th. And it's then that we hear that Steve Witkoff wants to raise the sanctions, lift the sanctions on Russia. It's just unbelievable. It's so frustrating. And then we have, so the question is, what's the response from Europe? What's the response from Ukraine? And again, you're going to have people who will be like, okay, we need to play it carefully. The kind of Mark Rutte approach of, stroking Trump, keeping him on side, stoking that sense of ego that he has. Keep on side, appease, keep on side. And many Europeans will be like that, and other allies. But I think you'll start to see more and more overt distaste for that kind of approach, and more appetite for just telling Trump to go screw himself. And you're starting to see that. So Gustav Gressel, who's like former military man, Austrian military man involved in European security policy and whatnot. So he's quite a guy, someone actually I was wanting to interview. He says it is predictable yesterday on DW, the German news outlet, on how the shortage of patriots in Ukraine provides Russia with opportunities to attack cities. And today, well, you read the news. In other words, 550 munitions thrown into Ukrainian airspace. Who knew? He said, in my opinion, the Rutte doctrine of being nice to Trump has failed. We need to look into ways to whack the American mule hard. Economic, financial, pressure, and if necessary, deterrence. Wow. So you've got a military policy maker in Europe saying we need to hit Ukraine. Sorry, we need to hit the United States hard from Europe. We're just about to enter into a bit of a trade war. Trump is calling the EU nasty and saying, having just got back from NATO meeting with all of these European leaders and saying how wonderful they were and how much they loved and cared for their nations. He then goes back to the US and says, oh, the EU are nasty. They're just trying to screw us over, etc., etc. So, you are going to get more overt positioning, I think, like you hear from Gustav Gressel. Here, I mean, as just an example, I know this is, you might say, oh, so what? Somebody in France has gone to the expense and effort of creating a massive mural on the side of a building here. A new mural in France depicting Lady Liberty covering her face in shame was unveiled the day before America's Independence Day. And, the big, beautiful bill where the huddled masses are not welcome anymore in the United States. It is the Statue of Liberty, crying here. So I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to see how Europe plays this and how Ukraine plays this. So then we have Trump speaking to Putin on the telephone yesterday. They had a phone call together. Putin and Trump spoke for almost an hour discussing Ukraine, and in particular, according to Putin's aide Ushakov, President Trump raised the issue of an early end to military operations. Putin noted that the search for a political negotiated solution to the conflict continues. In other words, hey, it continues, no change, really. Russia will pursue its goals and will not back down from them, Putin told Trump, Ushakov added. So Ushakov has said directly, Russia will pursue its goals and will not back down from them. Those maximalist objectives, they're not going to back down from. So Trump should come away from that phone call feeling bloody frustrated. He also said, Ushakov, that Putin congratulated Trump on the 4th of July holiday and noted Russia's contribution to the formation of American statehood. So that's nice. Based on Ushakov's statements following Putin's conversation with Trump, Gerashenko continues, Trump again called for a ceasefire as soon as possible, but Putin avoided answering, stating that he intends to continue pursuing the goals of the special military operation and dictate the terms of the truce. President Trump once again insists on ending the war in Ukraine in his conversation with Putin, but the strategy of easing pressure on Russia in the hope that Putin will cease fire is not working. On the contrary, it is making the situation worse. Russia not only understands force. Putin does not cooperate. He exploits others and makes them accomplices, or he fears them and therefore respects them. Weakening Ukraine will only provoke Putin to commit even greater war crimes against the peaceful Ukrainian people. Will there be another large-scale shelling of Ukrainian cities at night? In fact, this is Putin's answer and position. So, how's the US going to react to this? Well, you also hear, as a side note, that Putin and Trump discussed the possibility of exchanging films promoting traditional values close to Russia and the US presidential administration. In other words, you've got this anti-woke, traditional family values, anti-LGBT, culture wars alignment where Putin is going to get in the good books of all those Project 2025 people around Trump. The Heritage Foundation, the basis of the American government at the moment, the anti-immigration, pro kind of Heritage Foundation's version, understanding of religion. They are a religious kind of conservative think tank. They have developed this plan that's going to have at its center anti-woke return to social conservatism. Putin knows how to be a dictator. Putin knows how to manipulate. He already has the Heritage Foundation on his side. Heritage Foundation's changed their view on Ukraine. I did a whole video on this right back near the beginning of the war. They changed their views. If you look at was it Roberts, the head of Heritage Foundation? He just did an about face really suddenly. Like something must have happened. Putin and the KGB or the FSB and the Kremlin they got to the Heritage Foundation fundamentally and got them to shift completely. It was about the time of the hurricane in Hawaii. You started seeing stuff spouted by Heritage Foundation that was really anti-Ukraine. But at the beginning of the war, they were pro-Ukraine. So just like Elon Musk and Heritage Foundation flipped like that. Heritage Foundation wrote the 900-page document Project 2025 as a blueprint for the Trump administration. So the Trump administration is the Heritage Foundation. Trump is a figurehead, but he's ideologically vacuous. If Trump was told to massively support Ukraine and it'd be the best interests of the US and Trump could be a hero and he could get a Nobel Peace Prize for supporting Ukraine to the hilt, he would support Ukraine to the hilt, I think. His knowledge and ideology is really it's veneer deep. The Heritage Foundation and the people around Trump, their ideology is not skin deep. Their ideology is much, much deeper. J.D. Vance is a great example of that. Also Vaught, Stephen Miller, even Elbridge Colby there. He's very strongly hawkish on China. He has his ideas that are not so easy to sway. Putin knows this. Like, it's a job of his FSB, of his administration, is to know this stuff. Guaranteed, Putin couldn't give a rat's arse about films promoting traditional values. He couldn't give a rat's arse about traditional values in the United States. It's entirely part of his plan of manipulation. Honestly, the American administration is so easy to manipulate in its present form. Putin and Trump had a call, again, per the Russian readout, says Yaroslav Trofimov. Trump called for a ceasefire. Putin said Russia first needs to achieve the goals of the special military operation. Trump didn't object. And then they talked about cooperating in promoting traditional values in movies. A summary, says some fella here. Like a diligent apprentice eager for his master's approval, Trump couldn't wait to receive Putin's praises for a job well done in cutting off supplies to Ukraine. Putin did this by reaffirming he has to achieve the goals of the SMO and talking about movies. So, that is all rather depressing. The Kyiv Independent says Putin tells Trump Russia won't back down from its war aims in Ukraine. Okay, so Phillips O'Brien says, assuming this is true, if Trump does not rescind the US halt on promised military aid to Ukraine after his talk with Zelensky, so then today, Trump and Zelensky, that's probably happening right now, or may even be over, due to those two leaders are due to talk. Can we say that Trump is now an ally of Russia in its war against Ukraine? So if the US does nothing to continue to help Ukraine and allows themselves to be manipulated in this way by Russia, can we just formally say, says Phillips O'Brien, that the US is basically an ally of Russia and just get on and fight this war with Ukraine against Russia, China, and the United States? Now, the one good bit of news is that Trump was caught on a runway, again, let's have a conversation by a very loud engine, saying this. And it starts off being about the most critical we've ever heard him of Putin. And then instead of blaming the war on Putin, he blames the war on Biden. So he starts off quite positively and then goes down his typical tack.
President, call with Vladimir Putin today accomplished.
We had a call. It was a pretty long call. We talked about a lot of things, including Iran. And we also talked about, as you know, the war with Ukraine. And I'm not happy about that.
Mr. President.
So I'm not happy about that.
No, I didn't make any progress with it at all.
Mr. President, how much growth?
I didn't make any progress with that at all, he says there. Then he said this. So this was another opportunity to... this is the one where it's half of it is sounding good and the other half is just his usual bollocks. So, yeah, sorry, it wasn't that first video.
I'm speaking to President Zelensky tomorrow, early in the morning, and I'm very disappointed with the conversation I had today with President Putin, because I don't think he's there. And I'm very disappointed. Well, it's not, I'm just saying, I don't think he's looking to stop, and that's too bad. This is Biden. This isn't me. This is Biden's war. It wouldn't have happened if I were president. It wouldn't have happened. So, I in one way I had to get too involved because it's Biden's war. And I got stuck in the middle of it, just like I did with immigration and a lot of other things that they screwed up. But I was not happy with the conversation, no.
So, not happy at all with the conversation, and he's reiterated that, and that's the most critical I've heard him of Putin, although he's not directly critical of Putin, just not happy at the conversation. And it's clear that Putin doesn't want peace. I mean, that should be freaking obvious by now, but he's still blaming Biden. Still can't get away from the idea that Biden is responsible for all ills of the world. But yeah. So that should give us some hope. But if he comes out and does nothing, if he has a chat with Zelensky and effectively really tries to put added pressure on Zelensky, having not put any pressure on Putin whatsoever. So I bet you the phone call with Zelensky will involve trying to get Zelensky to do something, really pressuring him to do something. Whereas you can bet your bottom dollar that Trump didn't put any such pressure on Putin. Now, that talk that happened yesterday, as soon as that talk ended, literally as soon as it ended, because we had a really early set of strikes on Kyiv yesterday. It was daylight and they were striking. There was a reconnaissance drone over Kyiv. It was not good. It was not good. So Russia strikes Kyiv after the Putin-Trump talk because, of course, they did. Again, this should be a slap round the face of Trump. Trump should see this as a massive insult that Putin is mocking him, Trump and Putin had a long chat today, says the Euromaidan press, and guess what? Heavy Russian attack underway across Kyiv. Shahed drones buzz through nearly every district. Blasts from air defense fill the night. Alerts remain active in multiple regions. It's going to be a long, tense night in Ukraine. And here we can see people sheltering in the subways. That is the nature of the beast. Now, Emmanuel Macron, according to Agence France-Presse, has come out saying he hopes that the Trump-Zelensky call, quote, will provide all the answers expected by Kyiv. Well, yeah, so do I. I can hope for that. What's the plausibility? So just the whole Trump world at the moment is bizarre. Like, I'm not going to go down the whole, the deeply offensive, juvenile, immature stuff that he said about Jamie Raskin in the last 24 hours. That was just like, is this really the president of the United States? You're calling like Jamie Raskin ugly and this and that. It's like a playground spat. It's pathetic. But anyway, as pointed out by Ron Filipkowski, in the last 24 hours, Trump threatened Elon Musk, Thomas Massie, Japan, a judge in Israel, the CEO of AT&T, Jerome Powell, Canada, Tom Tillis, a Forbes reporter, Harvard, and migrants with being eaten by Burmese pythons in the Everglades, while releasing a new line of cologne. And that's where we're at. To the point where multiple countries have issued, and this has already been the case for a number of these countries, but it seems that some of them might have been added and upped a little bit. Multiple countries have just issued travel warnings for the US. Wow. Australia, Canada, UK, New Zealand has raised its alert level to level 2 due to reports of citizens being detained or delayed over documentation discrepancies. European countries, Germany, France, Denmark and Finland have all issued warnings about new US gender marker policies that may affect travellers who use X or non-binary identifiers, so they might get fall foul of the airports and borders. The UK took it a step further. Its Foreign Office has warned that minor entry mistakes could lead to detention or deportation and emphasised the variability of laws across different US states. I've seen a number of people, I even know some people, who are not going to the United States on holiday anymore. A lot of people announcing on socials that they have now cancelled holidays and whatnot. I know some people in the threads actually that have said that you are cancelling holidays, going to see family in the US. There are, in fact, this article talks about how much it could well be hurting the tourist industry as well. So it's just crazy times. So let's now go to the rest of the world with an eye on Ukraine, of course. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi told EU Representative Kaja Kallas that Beijing, quote, cannot afford a Russian loss in Ukraine, fearing it would shift US strategic focus entirely onto China, according to the South China Morning Post. Wang also denied claims that China is materially supporting Russia's war effort. Wow. So China have said, we can't have Russia losing that war because otherwise the US is just going to be looking straight at China and all their attention will be turned to China, and we don't want that. Wow. But as for the denial of helping Russia, I mean, that is ridiculous. They're clearly helping Russia in a number of very significant ways. So China, says Pekka Kalyanemi, America's top adversary, says it will not allow Russia to lose the war against Ukraine. Russia gets troops from North Korea, mercenaries from Africa, weapons from Iran, and tech and money from China, while Ukraine gets thoughts and prayers from the US. How is this not World War III? Yeah. So, going back to Azerbaijan, I think what's going on in the Caucasus, in Azerbaijan and Armenia, is deeply fascinating. Big news, according to Moscow Times, mass inspections targeting Russians have begun in Azerbaijan. Citizens of the occupying country are reporting widespread searches and acts of violence. The Russian embassy in Baku has issued a statement citing numerous appeals from its citizens who complain about constant inspections, searches, and alleged waves of physical abuse. According to Russian nationals, unknown individuals in civilian clothing, sometimes disguised as police officers, approach their residences, check documents, and question the reasons for their presence in Azerbaijan. Russians claim that these inspections were sometimes accompanied by threats or even the use of force against them and their family members. These incidents have provoked concern at the Russian embassy, which has urged Azerbaijani authorities to provide clarification and ensure the safety of Russian citizens. Meanwhile, both Azerbaijan and Armenia are trying to phase out Russian cultural influence, talking about like language schools and language in general not being so formally recognized and supported, the Russian language. All of this activity is prompting Russian Z bloggers to start openly admitting there's an unsettling shift in the Caucasus, raising concerns about the future of Moscow's imperial ambitions and the potential erosion of the geopolitical influence in the region. So we have here, as just one example, Russia preliminarily sidelined from Zangezur corridor, next step expulsion from the South Caucasus. Today, experts suggest Azerbaijan will take the first step toward politically and geostrategically removing Russia from the South Caucasus. The focus is on the Zangezur corridor, which is reportedly already preliminarily outside Moscow's control. Analysts can outline the scenario as follows. Turkey is in Azerbaijan today. And apparently there is going to be might be some deals going on between Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey. You've got to remember the Armenian genocide in Turkey. You've got to remember that Azerbaijan and Armenia don't like each other. And so all of this seems to be happening almost in spite of, to spite Russia. Absolutely incredible. So Turkey has organised a summit in Karabakh with leaders from all Central Asian countries, Pakistan, Afghanistan and Iran. Analysts believe Iran will be persuaded not to obstruct the Zangezur corridor project. Russia was not invited at all, a clear diplomatic signal. The next phase will involve the EU and NATO, and Turkey, a NATO member, playing a key role. Their main goal, push Russia out of the South Caucasus and establish a direct corridor to the Caspian Sea and Central Asia. It's all going to be about oil pipelines and alternatives to Russia. Armenia, observers say, will be pressurized in exchange for leaving the CSTO, the EU. So this is a case of, CSTO is the Russian version of NATO. And if Armenia leave that, then they've already signaled that they are effectively not really that interested in it. And removing the Russian military base, the West is promising bonuses. The emerging scenario is a clear reformatting of the South Caucasus without Russia, involving NATO, the EU and Turkey. That's a view from a Russian, that's how they see it happening. Fascinating. So just to let you know what the Zangezur corridor is and why it matters, is there a map here? Yeah, it's this. So you've got a corridor that splits off part of Azerbaijan. It makes it a kind of exclave of Azerbaijan there. From itself, with the Zangezur corridor coming down here from Armenia. Two uneasy neighbours in a troubled region fought a bloody war over the disputed Karabakh territory 2 years ago and continue to have many political differences. On Monday, Turkey, which borders the two former Soviet republics, called on both countries to take concrete steps towards reconciling with each other through the forging of better communication channels in order to open the critical Zangezur corridor. Quote, we strongly support the Zangezur corridor, which will provide a connection between the western regions of Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan, said Turkish Foreign Minister there. So this is 3 years ago. But this is actually, Turkey are in the region talking about this again. And it is important for strategic reasons. Why is it a big deal? So it plays a crucial role in increasing regional connectivity, not only through Caucasus, but also across Greater Eurasia, joining Turkish, Russian, Central Asian, Iranian and Armenian territories and linking Europe to Asia. The connectivity and corridor will also help galvanize trade relations between different states, while NATO and Russia have been on different pages regarding many issues from the Ukraine conflict to the Middle East. Both appear to have positive views on opening the transportation route. So anyway, so on and so forth. Just watch out for that, because that's pretty important. And, when you're talking about Caspian Sea and having stuff go through without having to go through Iran, Azerbaijan need it to go through the Zangezur corridor. Life just becomes very difficult if it can't. So it is a super important part of that area of the world. Okay, anyway, so that is happening. That is all happening. Watch out for Armenia and Azerbaijan and what goes on there with regard to Turkey. Now, the Russian economy, overheated by the war, is reaching its limit. It's very important for us to increase our pressure. Steve Witkoff is trying to relieve the pressure. The EU here are sort of underlying, is saying we need to increase our pressure. The 18th package of sanctions will hit the very heart of Putin's war machine. So the EU is seeking to do the right things, being held back by Slovakia and Hungary. Hungary, big friend of Trump and the Trump administration. Viktor Orban is. So, and Trump wanting to lift sanctions. There's all this. It all looks like the US is just aligning much more formally with Russia and its proxies. There, Evgen Istrabin, often commenting on the economy, says there's been so much bad news for Russia in 2 days that I decided to write a thread. Let's go. So, just a few things. Random bits picked out due to Gazprom's constant losses. So the gas state gas entity, they decided to shift the responsibility of paying taxes to other companies. Due to the lack of money in the budget, they are considering deregulating domestic prices for gasoline and diesel fuel. To save problematic industries, they want to introduce special taxes and special funds. Agricultural machinery manufacturers face 33% sales drop and face closure. And in fact, if you look at truck sales in Russia, they've absolutely just gone through a black hole. Bad weather has led to the loss of the harvest. Car sales could plummet by 40% by the end of the year. The Ministry of Industry and Trade is urgently developing support measures to save automakers. Small and medium business activity continues to decline. The economy goes into recession, says Istrabin. So there are loads of indicators, and I've given you many, many more over the last, consistently over all my videos. Russia's shadow fleet is estimated at 900 vessels, of which around 10 are monitored daily in the English Channel, according to French Admiral Benoit de Gibert. And it says Gibert. Zelensky has arrived so he was in Denmark a couple of days ago. He signed a bunch of stuff, signed some co-production agreements with an American drone manufacturer and with a UK drone manufacturer. So we're going to be producing drones in the UK, Ukrainian drones in the UK. And the Americans are going to be producing stuff for Ukraine. And also Denmark have signed a co-production agreement. So lots happened in that trip to Denmark. Now, let's just concentrate a little bit on Denmark. This is super important. So Denmark pushes to suspend Hungary's EU voting rights. This is really important because Denmark have taken on the role of EU presidency. And that is really super important. But in one area of the EU, we're going to talk about that, get a bit of detail on that. While they have that 6-month rotating presidency, Denmark have got a number of big things on their plate. So the big things they're going to be worrying about are Ukraine. So they're going to be pushing for support for Ukraine, and that's going to involve having to do something about Hungary and Slovakia. It's going to be about immigration. It's going to be about sustainable economic growth in the green sectors as well, where the US at the moment is completely eschewing green technology and renewables. They're not just getting rid of EV mandates and green tech subsidies. They're then going to get rid of the subsidies and put taxes on. So they basically want to look at the future-proofing economic domains and just screw them over because they're being funded by fossil fuels, dark money. Right? That sounds all conspiracy theory. It's absolutely true. Trump admitted it. He said before he was elected, come and meet with me. You give me $1 million and I will give you policy. So, and he said that to the oil and gas firms. So they went and met with him, and now you're seeing the policy. There you go. Big, beautiful bill is for the fossil fuel magnates and for billionaires. Now, in the EU, they're still looking at trying to do things that are good for the world, right? And also good for their own economies. So Denmark pushes to suspend, but back to Hungary. Hungary's EU voting rights. Denmark wants Europe to deploy its full legal arsenal against Hungary over violation of the bloc's fundamental rights, including by pursuing the Article 7 so-called nuclear option against Budapest. It's kicking them out of the EU. Quote, we are still seeing a violation on fundamental values, Danish European Affairs Minister told reporters, where the European Commission is on a visit as Copenhagen takes over the rotating presidency of the Council of EU. And remember, I explained that a little bit the other day, but we're going to just remind ourselves. That is why we will continue the Article 7 procedure after the hearing on Hungary. Article 7 is a clause in the EU treaty that allows countries to vote to exclude or penalise a member that falls foul of the bloc's rules. It's widely considered to be a nuclear legal option, which the EU has so far stopped short of using, despite Brussels saying that Hungary has violated its laws. Bier, who is this minister, said that the bloc should also look at restricting access for EU funds for countries that violate European law. Another major issue for Denmark, EU enlargement. The minister called out for Hungary's ongoing blockade of Ukraine's membership in the European Union, saying Denmark was, quote, willing to look at all political and practical solutions for us to move forward. So enlargement is another thing actually to add to that list of priorities for Denmark. So if the EU countries decide to escalate their ongoing Article 7 procedure, they could strip Hungary of its voting rights on aspects of European policy such as enlargement, removing Budapest's ability to veto Ukraine's membership. However, diplomats caution about moving ahead requires at least full-throated support from Paris and Berlin to rally the rest of the bloc, support that so far has been lacking. With Hungary still dead set against Ukraine's membership, there is speculation that the European Commission could decide to move ahead with Moldova's membership bid by formally opening a negotiation cluster in the coming days. Moldova and Ukraine have been moving in a lockstep toward EU membership, so uncoupling them would be controversial. But Biera said Denmark isn't ready to split the two membership bids. It is still our goal to open cluster 1 together with Moldova and Ukraine. Now, let's just have a little look at this rotating membership. Presidency even.
More complicated than that. In fact, the EU doesn't have one president, not even two. There are actually 4. Let's break it down quickly. First up, we've got the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. Think of her as the EU CEO. Then there's the president of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola. Kind of like the Speaker of the House, but with more EU flair. Next, there's the President of the European Council, Antonio Costa. He's the guy coordinating meetings of national leaders. And finally, brace yourself, because the President of the Council of the EU isn't even a person. It's a country. And right now, that's Denmark. The Council of the EU is one of the EU's 2 legislative chambers. Fancy talk for where the lawmaking happens. And as the president of the Council of the EU, Denmark gets to chair meetings, broker deals between countries, and shape what gets pushed up the agenda. What makes it really unique is that the presidency rotates every 6 months between EU member states. From July the 1st to December the 31st, it's Denmark's turn to set the agenda. Before Denmark, Poland held the presidency, and next up, it'll be Cyprus. So, back to Denmark. What are they actually planning? Let's start with security. The big goal? For Europe to be able to defend itself by 2030.
We have to build an even stronger Europe.
So that was really important. So European defence, which is coupled with support for Ukraine, enlargement, as we just mentioned, and migration. So those are big things. And trade and Trump, there's obviously trade war with Trump, the budget, and then cutting red tape. And within trade, there is this desire with Denmark as well to think about the environment and issues concerning that.
To be able to defend itself by 2030.
We have to build an even stronger Europe, a more secure Europe, where we are able to protect our democracies.
Danish
we have to rearm Europe, and we have to boost our support to Ukraine.
There are 2 key pieces of legislation. First, the European Defence Industry Programme, or EDIP, with a budget of 1.5 billion euros. This is money from the next EU budget, meant to boost Europe's ability to produce its own weapons, with joint procurement and support for projects of common interest, like Sky Shield or the Eastern Shield. Second, the Security Action for Europe, or SAFE, with a budget of 150 billion euros. Now, this isn't regular EU spending, it's debt, raised by the European Commission and then lent to the member states at better rates. It is basically an emergency tool to help countries scale up on defense production fast, buying more weapons, opening more factories, and filling stockpiles. SAFE has already been agreed upon, but the European Parliament is super angry. They've been cut out of the talks and are suing the Commission in the European Court of Justice. That's a headache Denmark might inherit. As for the EDIP, it's still just a proposal, and Denmark wants to get it over the line in the next 6 months. That includes answering a big question. Should countries like the US or the UK get access to EU defense funds? And then, of course, there's Ukraine, Denmark's next big priority. Since the invasion, Denmark has been a powerhouse supporter, pledging 8.6 billion euros in weapons and ammunition. In terms of GDP share, it's the second largest EU contributor, right after Estonia. Bravo, Denmark. You've really earned our respect. But on the EU-wide scene, the Danish presidency is already under pressure. Slovakia vetoed the 18th sanctions package against Russia, causing a major roadblock. The new package clamps down on Russian energy revenues, including lowering the oil price cap to $45 per barrel. And it cuts off financing to more Russian banks, expanding transaction bans. And the crazy thing, Slovakia is blocking all of this over an unrelated dispute about the phase-out of Russian fossil fuels. Prime Minister Robert Fico is asking for financial compensation, and it's now up to Denmark to navigate this mess. And speaking of vetoes, Denmark's got another one to deal with, this time on enlargement, which the Danish official program calls a geopolitical necessity. But Hungary is not playing along. Despite the Commission saying Ukraine has met all conditions to start talks, Hungary is still blocking the opening of negotiations. And then there's the big one, migration.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Really fascinating video. It gives you a nice oversight into what's going on. But hopefully that gives you a greater context and understanding to the machinations of the European Union and the role that Denmark's going to be playing over the next 6 months. So here we have Mette Frederiksen saying if there are any gaps in the US support, Europe should be willing to fill in, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen said. All of us hope that the US will continue to support its support for Ukraine and because of Ukraine for Europe. But if there are any gaps, and I personally believe that we should be willing to fill in, then I personally believe that we should be willing to fill in. I'm quite proud of the cooperation we have when it comes to supporting production directly in Ukraine. It's working because of you and your companies. So that's particularly from, this is coming from Denmark. But I would like to put this message on the table also for the rest of the European leaders that you have more capacity than we have financing. She said, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen added that EU member states have the financial possibilities to support Ukraine directly. On the one hand, there is a national escape clause, so this gives national fiscal flexibility to invest in defence capabilities, which can also go to Ukraine. Then there's a safe joint procurement. They can directly invest in the Ukrainian defence industry, she said. Right, and then I want to bring you onto something else. So we're now going to move from Europe to Canada and Greenland, or it's still Europe actually, because it's Greenland, which is this kind of territory of Denmark. So again, staying with Denmark, arguably. Now, we've had this bellicose rhetoric from Trump with regard to taking over Greenland. We've also had it with regard to Canada being the 51st state of America. Canada have cleverly gone about, and this may have gone a little bit under the radar, but have potentially gone and signed a bit of a mining deal with Greenland, which is exactly what the US would want. That's largely why they're so interested in Greenland. It's about the mining capabilities there, about the rare earth minerals and whatnot. But it's also about Greenland's position, geographical position. Anyway, just listen to what's happened
recently. And it seems that those meetings and discussions may have quietly resulted into something a little positive. Just announced recently and reported here in the Financial Post, Greenland awards Canadian miner permit for metal critical to defense industry. Greenland has given permission to a Canadian mining company to explore for molybdenum, I hope I said that right, a metal critical to the production of steel amid growing demand from the defense industry. The Arctic island and its mineral riches have this year become hot geopolitical topics after Donald Trump's persistent request to take over the territory, which is part of the Kingdom of Denmark. At the same time, the European Union has identified Greenland as a strategic area of interest as the continent tries to become less dependent on the import of raw materials. A company called Greenland Resources, which is based in Toronto, got a 30-year exploitation permit for molybdenum, which I can't say, and magnesium at the Malmberg project in East Greenland. According to a statement Thursday, the company can apply to extend the permit up to 50 years. The miner said Malmberg has the potential to supply all the EU's demands for this mineral that I can't pronounce for defense purposes for decades to come. The Canadian company has signed off-take deals with European steelmakers. Molybdenum is currently only produced in China, which has 87% of the market. The United States has the remaining 13%. So which was the better strategy? Quiet, respectful diplomacy, one-on-one meetings outside the media spotlight, having Canada sign up as a partner in a $1.3 trillion European defense spending initiative, having Canadian companies now secure contracts so they can supply the materials that'll be required as this massive amount of money gets spent, or to barge in like a bull in a china shop to make bombastic threats, trying to make your allies cower in submission and tweeting out to the whole world what a big guy you are. This guy certainly controlled the news cycle for a number of months on this topic, but quietly in the background, this leader has handed Canadian companies deals on a silver platter. So Canada completely outsmarts the United States, or maybe I should look at it differently. It's really not hard to outsmart a competitor that has an absolutely ridiculous strategy. Maybe it's not Canada that outsmarted the United States. Maybe it's the United States that outstupided Canada. And I just want to say this is another one.
So anyway, obviously a bit of very pro-Canadian rhetoric going on there. But you get the idea that actually there is some quite sensible diplomacy going on with Greenland, where Greenland is going to be far more receptive to that kind of congenial approach of togetherness and cooperation, rather than we're going to invade you. we're going to economically coerce Greenland out of the grasp of Denmark and into the harsh embrace of the United States. So Canada here may have played a clever little move. Okay, what else do we have? I just want to go, to this nice little thing to have almost near the end here. This is tremendous. The analyst says, look at the lad's face. He can hardly believe it's real. I can only imagine how he feels at that age, because I know how I would have felt, the pride and honour. It's hard enough just being in the same room. 20 feet away as an adult. We put so much into our desire for Ukraine to win, and Zelensky personifies it. I know the day the war ends, that Russia is defeated or collapses or whatever happens to it, I'm going to be a wreck. Many of us will. The emotion is held in by a mental dam. It'll be an experience, that's for sure. So here we have a wonderful situation where Zelensky presented, when he was in Denmark, the Future of Ukraine award to an 11-year-old volunteer, Jens Fogh Thomsen from Denmark. Since last year, he's been making Easter decorations with his own hands, and thanks to their sale, has raised more than 34,000 Danish kroner. I'm not quite sure how much that is, but that's absolutely brilliant for a Danish kid to do that on behalf of Ukraine.
Hi, Jens. That is a surprise. Yeah, I'm happy to see you. Happy to meet you. Hi.
Hi, Colin.
Good to see you.
Hi, pretty. You too.
Nice to meet you. Thank you. And I'm very thankful from all our people. First of all, from all our children. And you know it, and they are under attacks, under Russian attacks, but they are trying to survive, and they survive because they love Ukraine, because they have friends. And you're a big friend of Ukraine. Thanks for these backpacks, yes, in English backpacks that you did, that you collect money and helped our Ukrainian children. From all our children, we're honored that we have such friends from Denmark. My congratulations, yes. That is for you.
Så får der nok. Smile.
I don't, I don't think I've ever seen a child so shell-shocked as that. Absolutely wonderful. And this is Zelensky's skill, isn't it? In when he was at the NATO summit recently in The Hague, and he met some local children and was answering their questions, doing the sort of thing that I always, I'm going to compare it to Trump, but you could never imagine Trump would do something like this. The humanity is just not there. The empathy is just not there. Whereas this is something that I think Zelensky knows very well. This is a strong hand that he has when it comes to this kind of interaction. And that's brilliant. Really great to see that support from young children around Europe there. Now, talking about young people, students here, unfortunately, it doesn't look too good in Serbia, as it appears that students are being rounded up and arrested here by the police. You have that issue or the option for an administration to, in the face of massive protests, as there have been in Serbia, and the same can be said of what happened in Georgia, what's happening in Georgia, is when you see these huge protests, you either go, oh, we're doing something wrong, or we better change our approach, we better take on board what they're saying and try and work together with these people. How many authoritarian administrations do that? Or do you go, screw them, let's double down even harder and arrest. And that's obviously what's going on in Serbia, unfortunately. This is not apropos to anything, but I don't know when I'm going to get a chance to talk about this, and if it's in my head, it's got to come out. But this is quite important for what I've talked about previously. So although this is a very localized example of something happening in the UK, actually this is relevant for the whole world. So I've talked previously about if you frustrate, we talk particularly about right-wing populism. Why do we always talk about right-wing populism and not left-wing populism? Because left-wing populism is effectively irrelevant at the moment. There are very few left-wing populist governments that are getting in, or parties that are getting in control and getting voted in. So we don't worry about that so much. Right-wing populism is growing around the world, partly because of migration, well, largely because of migration issues. So it's happening in the US with MAGA. I would put MAGA republicanism, not centrist republicanism, but MAGA republicanism as right-wing populism. Reform in the UK, Rassemblement National in France, AFD in Germany, and then you've got Confederation and to a degree PIS in Poland. You've got what we've seen in Romania as of late. You've got Fidesz in Hungary. You've got, I think, Smer and their coalition in Slovakia, and a number of these Vox in Spain, these different parties around Europe and the world that are vying for power. FPO in Austria. And what happens, Austria is actually a really good example. What happens is often people coalesce, they form like a coalition to try and stop the right-wing populists getting into power. What that can bring about is a frustration from people supporting them that they're not allowed to get into power. PVV, actually, no, PVV is a great example of what I'm just about to talk about. So that's in the Netherlands. So you have this situation where, like, Rassemblement National are being frustrated, AFD are being frustrated, where they get enough power, but no one likes them. No one wants to go into partnership with them. They're kind of like the outcasts and rejected. And what that means is that people in the electorate gets frustrated, and they actually gain more power and more popularity because everyone sees them as the outsiders, as the anti-establishment people fighting against this establishment political class that are frustrating them from being able to get into power. And so they generate more and more momentum until they do get in. There is this theory that you need to let them get in because then they will show you how crap they are at ruling. But when you are only interested in anti-immigration and anti-woke, I'm not saying that those issues are not important, but if that's your one-trick pony, if that's it, and you get into power and you have to govern a country or a council or a county or a state, if you get into power based on, freaking hate woke, trans toilets, and then suddenly you're in power and you're like, oh my God, I've got a massive budget. Oh, what am I doing about adult education? What am I doing? Like you didn't get into politics because you were serious about helping the country and being serious about governance, right? I'm interested in the whole gamut of politics. You voted me in because I've shouted about foreigners and I hate trans people, and right, I've been voted in. Oh my goodness, what do I do? And so there is this theory that if you vote these very populist, very one-track minded people into power, then that might be what's needed to get them rejected more sustainably, because it turns out that they're unserious parliamentarians, they're unserious politicians and politically minded people. They just don't have the chops. So what happened in the UK, and this happened with PVV to some extent in the Netherlands, is that Geert Wilders got in, and then they did finally get a coalition going, and he hasn't really done a very good job. In the UK, Reform in the local elections did blindingly well. So we had local council elections, not parliamentary, not MPs, but council elections in some areas of England, and they did really, really well, Reform. And in a couple of councils, they took control of the entire council. So I think Kent County Council, Nottinghamshire, and Durham County Council, or County Durham. And they won with huge amounts. Was it Durham it's Kent, I think, where 50 or 56 councillors got in. Something like only 4 of them had any prior experience of governance, of being involved in politics type thing. And what happened in Kent County Council is the council kind of fell apart, it became paralysed, people weren't turning up to meetings, and it was a massive disaster. People, and then in a number of these places, some people got voted in and found out they weren't able to stand. They shouldn't have even been able to stand for election. And they were voted in, maybe they're in the armed forces or this or that. And so you had a load of people who were voted in and now have either quit or have been invalidated from running. So you've had a bunch of by-elections. And what's happened is in 2 places, the 2 seats that they've had by-elections for where they're defending a seat, so they got elected, in the intervening period, Reform have shown themselves not to be able to run the councils. So in the intervening period, you've then had a rejection of Reform. It's exactly what I'm talking about. So Liberal Democrats have gained from Reform. This is just a local council, but in Benfield side in Durham, right? And Reform had a minus 6.8. It's not huge, but Reform went down. Even Labour went up a bit, and Labour in all sorts of trouble at the moment. Lib Dems went up 17% and took that seat. Here, a Conservative gained from Reform in Newark, in Nottinghamshire, one of these other Reform councils. So Conservatives just went up a little bit, Reform down a bit. Now, it's not huge, down 1.6%. But the point is that when you allow these unserious people into power and they actually can show how they run things, they show themselves to be not very good. And then you might see their popularity dip. But interestingly, the same day, a bunch of by-elections had just taken place in England, or actually in Wales as well. So in Llandudno, in Powys, here, Reform, instead of going down, they went up 35.1%. Now, that means that they didn't have a councillor before, or weren't voted on before that. But although they didn't quite win that one, they had a massive uptick. And here Reform have gained from the Conservatives in Suffolk, so they don't control Suffolk, they don't have any kind of sensible power there, and here they've gone up 28.8%, again from 0 to 28.8%. My point being that if they're frustrated from power and we're in this febrile political atmosphere, these guys are going to get lots of votes. But in places where they're finally actually given power, they end up losing popularity. And they're just 4. These are the only 4 results I've seen today. And I may be wrong here. I may not know the details of all these, but I'm just like piecing this together and thinking the 2 places that they were defending, their vote went down because their track record of actually governing is poor. And the 2 places where they weren't defending, they went up hugely. And they either gained or they almost gained. So this idea that if you consistently frustrate these extreme populists, then you don't give them a chance to show how crap they are at ruling. That's my point there. Anyway, I thought I'd end with that. Thanks for watching. Take care. Speak soon. Toodle pips.